Hello, good evening, and welcome to another climate change question and answer. This, I think, must be about our third or fourth or even fifth that we've done, and you are all really welcome to join us, and thank you for coming along. We're going to have an interactive session so that this will not just be you being talked at, but very much your opportunity to ask any questions and get involved. Tell us what we're doing right and tell us what we're not doing so well, please. Tonight, we are going to be talking about biodiversity, and just I should have made you aware at the beginning, this is being recorded, this event tonight, and it's actually being live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. Biodiversity, that's everything that you might find in one particular place. So it could be different types of life, like animals, plants, microorganisms, and even bacteria. And actually, it's quite interesting because the Department of Education has just announced that there will be a new GCSE added to the national curriculum in 2025. This new GCSE is going to be called Natural History, and it will include a large section on biodiversity, which is really good news because it actually means that young people learning and taking GCSEs will have the opportunity to learn a lot more about biodiversity. Northumberland is very rich in biodiversity. We know about our red squirrels and our bats and our water voles, and many other fascinating forms of life. It's a natural environment that we all want to preserve and enhance as much as we can. And there is no doubt that climate change is having its effect in the climate that we have. We know that things are getting drier, sometimes they're getting much wetter, and then things are can be very much more sunshine than we have traditionally been used to. This can disrupt life cycles and the environment in which we rely upon. And these natural environments, particularly forests, parks, and peat bogs, are also really important, as I'm sure most of you know, for the absorption of large amounts of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, which is essential to help us meet our targets of becoming carbon neutral as a county by 2030. And this is something that's very important to all of us and to the council, because we've made this a real priority for us to build on and to lead on. Now, we will also be talking about forests and our colleagues in Forestry England, landowners, and through our own Great Northumberland Forest, this new initiative. We will be doing everything we can, and we'll have an opportunity to hear more about that in a minute, and also for you to ask any questions about that that you would like to. The Great Northumberland Forest is not what it sounds like. It's not a great, big, kind of kielder thing. It's actually, there will be pockets of larger planting, but it could be little community orchards, it could be little specific tree planting areas that will together make up this new Great Northumberland Forest. But we'll hear about that in a minute. So there will be plenty of chances to ask questions. On our panel tonight, we have Matt Baker, who is our Director of Climate Change, who you will have come across, I think. Also, Nick Johnston. Mark Roberts is our Senior Climate Change and Sustainability Manager. Hazel Skur is our Assistant Project Manager for Sequestration, Partnerships and Engagement. And she is keeping an eye on how we talk tonight, how long we are giving. She gives us, and she may cut us off at any minute, and that could include me as well. Mark Child, who's the Head of Integrated Planning and Environment at Forestry England. Katie Scott, who's the very lively and active coordinator of Rossbury Climate and Nature. I'm very glad to see Katie involved here tonight. And Andrea Francis, who's our ecologist at Northumberland County Council. So just a quick run through the plan. Hazel will be joined by Katie to give a presentation about the tree warden scheme. This will then have a short presentation. We'll have a short presentation from Mark Child about the Great Northumberland Forest and what it'll look like, and other tree planting initiatives that we can all become involved in. Then we'll hear from Anna about the overlap between ecology and climate change and what the council is doing. And then we will open the floor to questions from you, the audience, in the final 45 minutes. I will be here. I'm Glen Sanderson, I'm the leader of the council, but we have all these great experts here that I will now gladly hand over to, and it'll be Matt who takes Matt.
Thanks, Glen Sanderson. Yeah, good evening, everybody. So we've been through the kind of structure of the session, which you're going to see on a slide in a second. So for any colleagues who are and residents who are looking back on this on YouTube, then you can scroll to the time if you want to see a specific part of the agenda. And then the only other thing that I want to add before I kind of hand over to Nick, who's just going to give us a little bit of detail, is at the bottom of the screen you'll see the Q&A function. The Q&A function's open now and will be open all the way to the end of the session. So please post questions. We'll answer as many as we can in the meeting. If we don't get to specific questions, we'll make sure we kind of give you a reply over the email. So I'm just going to hand over to Nick, who's just going to give us a bit of the net zero context for why biodiversity is so important for our ambition to net zero for the county. Nick.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, so I just wanted to kind of set out the context from the climate change point of view of why biodiversity and natural resources are so important. And I've put up here the emissions from various kind of sectors in Northumberland at the most recent count in 2019. And you can see there the grey bars are the positive emissions that we have from heating, transport, from energy, and other sources. And then in Northumberland, we're lucky enough to have this huge negative bar. This is carbon dioxide that's absorbed by our natural resources. That's by far the biggest carbon sink of any sort of local authority area in England. And it's primarily down to forestry. In fact, the government who provide these data don't yet measure things like peat, which is also having an impact. And as part of our climate action plan and our ambitions to get to net zero, it's absolutely vital that we preserve and increase that level of carbon sequestration. So Hazel, if you just click, we should get a neat little extra bit added onto that bar. No, that hasn't worked. Never mind. There are additional savings that we want to make on that carbon sequestration, carbon absorption target. And there's lots of different areas which tie into this, which you're going to see on this slide here. These ones that are coming up now are in the climate action plan, and they're really important, fundamental to where we go. Now, the way that the county council works, as you know, it's not just one big team all doing the same thing. There's lots of different areas working on lots of different projects, and it's important to kind of understand that the climate change team, we're leaning into things such as the Great Northumberland Forest, but it's our colleague who you'll hear from later, Mark, who oversees that. Woodland management sort of sits under local services, but we're supporting them in developing management plans to enhance how our council-owned woodland is working. We're part of the Northumberland Peat Partnership, which is working towards kind of understanding the condition of peatlands across the county, and restoring peat bogs, which is such an important habitat for us to sequester carbon. We're doing work in terms of farming to understand how our farmers can be at the heart of increasing carbon sequestration and biodiversity, whilst also providing the food that we need. And we're starting to look at blue carbon, which is the term for kind of marine habitats which sequester carbon. That's kind of quite new to us. That said, biodiversity goes a lot further than just carbon sequestration. It happens that almost everything you do to improve biodiversity also helps to absorb carbon, but it's not the case that carbon is our only kind of priority and our only area of interest when it comes to biodiversity. And that's why it's really important, and Anne's going to talk to us a little bit later about the kind of complexities of biodiversity and why if we just say let's plant loads of trees everywhere, that's not necessarily the best way to manage it. It becomes very complex, and we're very lucky that we have ecologists like Anne in the council who can support and who have the expertise to build these strategies. And I think Anne will probably mention the local nature recovery strategies and things like biodiversity net gain when she speaks as well, and habitat restoration, which are kind of coming up here as well. There's other things that the council does as well. Things like verge and hedgerow management, green spaces management, where we have to balance lots of different priorities. We need to create kind of amenity areas. We need to ensure that our roads are safe and can be sort of seen around. So we're very aware of kind of the complexities and the conflicting needs there as we balance kind of those measures against what nature requires, and we're making progress there as well, and happy to kind of answer questions around that. And then tree wardens, I haven't actually put on this list stupidly, which is really an oversight of me, but you'll hear from Katie very shortly about that scheme, which is going to be really important in terms of protecting and improving the woodland that we have across our communities from people who live near these really important woodlands. So it's a really complex picture. There's loads of different areas where we are focusing and where we're building projects and plans. And I'm really, really happy that you're going to get to hear from some of the people at the heart of those areas today. So we're all very happy to hear your questions and answer them. If we don't have time to respond to them during the session, then we will do so afterwards by email, but we hope to get through as many as we possibly can. Please do ask away, and we look forward to answering them later. So I think I'm now going to hand over to Katie to talk about the tree warden scheme, which is something that we've launched recently. Thanks very much. Over to you, Katie.
Just unmuting myself. Thank you very much. Thanks very much for inviting me to talk about this, which I am passionate about. It's a great opportunity to show you what we've been doing in Rothbury. Next slide, please, Hazel. So just to set in context how it all began, it was in lockdown, you know, when we were just allowed to go for like little walks around. And of course, I'm always walking around where I live in Rothbury because it's beautiful, but started looking in new ways at some of the ancient and veteran trees that we have in our areas, some amazing ones. And for example, if in this one, which was the first, if this tree could talk story, can you see those 3 sycamore trees? That's on Armstrong Park, which is our football field in Rothbury. And you know what? That's got to be the most beautiful football field in the whole country. I can't believe there's anywhere nicer. But I was having a walk around there, and those 3 sycamore trees at the back, can you see the one in the middle? It's fantastic. And it's got, I think it might have bats in it. Anne will be able to tell me if it does. It looks like it does. It's got a little hawthorn tree growing in it. It's just fantastic. And behind it is Cragside. And it just started me off thinking, God, if this tree could talk, what a lot of interesting stories it could tell. So I got very involved in researching this, and there's a lot of historians in Rothbury, local historians, who were very happy to tell me over a pint all about different aspects. So that was really great. I like doing research like that. I developed my own website, Rothbury Trees, which I'd love you to go and have a look at. And I made good friends with another Nick Johnson, who's the Northumberland Veteran Tree Project person. And I was telling him about these stories that I'm writing, and that how lovely it would be to make a tree trail that people could walk around and learn a little bit about the history of these trees. And he said, oh, that's amazing, because I'm actually doing that in Newcastle. So I'm working with him on an app for our trees, which I think should be ready in summer. So that's an exciting thing. Next slide, please, Hazel. So as I was researching on the internet, all things tree, I came across the Tree Council. And in 1987, there was a terrible storm, which a lot of us, you won't, Hazel, you're far too, loads of people will remember, It was shocking, and there was 15 million trees killed during that. And there was such an outpouring of grief from people across the country that the Tree Council thought we need to somehow harness this desire of the public to help trees. And so they developed the Tree Warden scheme, which is run via local authorities. So lots of different local authorities have volunteer tree wardens within their areas. And that's a great thing, I think. Next slide, please, Hazel. So tree wardens, they're all different, you know, all over the country. There's different groups of them, and they have a Facebook page, which if you want to become a tree warden, you know, go and have a look at the Tree Council's Tree Warden Facebook page, because lots of different people chat away on there and ask questions and help one another. But they're all different from one another, which is what's so fantastic about it. So you don't have to do what I do. You do what you want to do. They work independently of one another. So what I'm doing today is just telling you a little bit about what we do, but that doesn't mean that's what you have to do, because they are independent. Next slide, please. So I managed to nag Northumberland County Council into working with the Tree Council to launch the Tree Warden scheme. And I'm very proud that it was launched in Rothbury on the 19th of March. And there you can see Kimberly videoing, I think, and taking a picture of us with the beautiful plaque. This is excellent. Northumberland County Council purchased 150 saplings for us, which we planted along the verge by Beggar's Rig. And these 5 huge, beautiful trees, native cherry and silver birch, which we've happened to water because they've definitely been needing it in this weather. So that's a very proud thing for us in Rothbury. Next slide, please. So what we do in Rothbury. So there's about 15 of us all together, and I've managed to get some experts to come to talk to us about various different things, which has been very fascinating, including talking about health and safety. And by that, I mean telling us if we're out and about, we've agreed to look at the local trees in our area, keep an eye on them. And if it looks like a branch could fall or something bad could happen, we know what we're meant to do about that to make sure that eventuality doesn't come, and to risk assess that. And we've had other talks about different things. Some people are growing trees from seeds that they collected over in the autumn. And I collected loads of keys from a beautiful mature ash tree that doesn't have ash dieback in autumn, and I've scarified them and they're all waiting, and I'm so hoping that they will germinate and that I'll be able to have a lot of beautiful saplings. Some people are planting trees. We've got people planting trees in our graveyard, and along with wildflowers too, so that's lovely. And also in our hospital grounds. They were very keen on that. So if you are thinking of becoming a tree warden and you've got a hospital near you, do go and ask them if they've got areas that they'd like wildflowers or trees planting, because I bet you they would say yes. We maintain trees as well. So, you know, there's 150 saplings, for example, that NCC kindly gave to us. We've got a rota of people, so every week somebody goes and checks and pulls the weeds away from them, make sure they're not getting overwhelmed, and just checks up on them. Okay. Next slide, please. But before I'd even heard of the Tree Warden scheme, these 2 amazing people that live near me, these are the phantom tree planters. These have been planting literally thousands of trees over so many years. Alan particularly, he works with Northumberland County Council Highways Department. So what he does is he goes out and he spots verges, you know, on the side of the road that are wide enough and safe enough to plant trees. And he talks to highways and gets them to come out and look and agree. And then he grows his own trees, him and Jane, or they purchase them from Cheviot Trees. And he has, literally thousands of trees in our area and continues to do so. They're wonderful people. Next slide, please. And I've just realised, Hazel, how can people answer this? This was a quiz to see if people knew what they were looking at. Is it possible for anybody to answer, or shall I just say?
Just go for it. Tell us, educate us, Katie.
All right. I bet everyone will say, oh, I knew that. These pictures, which look revolting and are revolting, are what's happening when trees have been planted 10, 15, 20 years ago, and they've just been left with the tree guard on. So one of the things we in Rothbury tree wardens do is we go out and free the trees as often as we can, safely and with permission, obviously. But these ones in a field near Simonside, when you cut the tube off and open it, these were full of like really rotting material, and the tree trunks were rotting. So we've tried to pull it all off. The one on the bottom left, that's heather that's grown taller than me. I'm not very tall, but anyway, taller than me. This great massive amount of heather grown inside the tube, trying to get to the light and competing with the tree. So these are the bane of my life. Could I have the next slide, please? Oh, now. See, this is one of the trees. Look at this lovely birch tree. It's fallen down ages and ages and ages ago, but it's still continuing to grow because they do, don't they? But we couldn't get this tree guard off because it's stuck underneath. But trees just want to grow anyway, even if they have fallen down. Next slide, please. And so this just leads me toward the end of what I'm telling you about, which is what we might do in the future. Now, I did last year talk to some people about hedge laying, and I know some people in Coquetdale, some farmers who do hedge lay, and it's a wonderful thing. And there are actually different styles of hedge laying. This picture is by David Boyson, who's a hedge layer from Hartburn, and he told me that this is the Northumbrian style. But can you see below, if you want to learn the styles, it doesn't actually list Northumberland or Northumbrian. So I did have this idea, that which is probably going nowhere, that wouldn't it be great if you got some young people, because this is a dying art, wouldn't it be great if you got young people learning how to hedge lay? And if Northumberland held a competition to make a new pattern that was the Northumbrian hedge laying pattern, I think that'd be marvelous, but I don't know how to go further with that. So what I am trying to do is set up a community orchard, which would be wonderful, but I bet you can guess what the issue is. Can't find a suitable land that anyone will let us have. And last slide, please, Hazel. If you do decide to be a tree warden, I have to say NCC are really supportive and hands-on. Here you can see Hazel, who's literally hands-on. I got her to plant one of those great big trees because I was too weak to do it, but she's very strong and young. So NCC will be really helpful to you, and it is a very life-enhancing thing to get together a group of people to do however you want to do it, whatever interests you. I should say some of our tree wardens, we've got complete, we've got experts, we've got Professor of Ecology and several ecologists as tree wardens, as well as people like me who are just generally old hippie tree huggers, and other people who just want to help. So it's nice to get together and do what you can for trees. And thank you for listening to me.
Thanks very much, Katie. It was really lovely overview of what you've been doing. Just to add a small amount, in terms of signing up to be a tree warden, it can be as an individual, or if you wanted to create a group around it, that's also definitely something that we would love to have. And the information on applications is on our Northumberland County Council website. If we go through the climate change web pages and into our environment, all of the information is on that web page. We will be sending out the information and the links to all the attendees that signed up today. So if you are interested in this, then please do sign up, and the sign-ups do close on the 3rd of June, just so that we can start putting together introductions and getting people going and giving out resources. So thank you very much. I'm just now going to pass over to Mark to talk about the Great Northumberland Forest project.
Thanks, Hazel. Good afternoon or good evening, everyone. And just to say, Katie had a lovely morning out with Alan on Monday, having a look at some of the work he's done around the Rothbury area. It's really good to see, so really promising. So yes, I'm here to talk about the Great Northumberland Forest. Next slide, please, Hazel. So as Glenn mentioned at the start, the plan is to plant millions of trees, creating more wooded landscapes across the county to help tackle the big challenges, including climate change and biodiversity decline. And a variety of different woodland types and sizes will be created, and together they will be known as the Great Northumberland Forest. So not necessarily one big block slap bang in the middle. It's going to be a mixture of individual trees through to small copses, hedgerows, networks, through to small blocks and larger blocks of woodland. That's kind of where we're really trying to sort of promote and engage in our activity. Next slide, please. So the initiative was announced back in the autumn of 2019, with that initial first phase of being the creation of 3 new forests covering 500 hectares and planting 1 million trees by 2024. And through partners, mainly Forestry England at the moment, we've delivered close on to half of that at the moment. And we're exploring further opportunities with our partners to deliver the rest by 2024. But since 2019, so since when the initiative was announced, there have been over 767 hectares of new woodland created in the county, and over 240,000 trees planted in addition to that hectareage, so either in individual tree schemes or small copses which aren't mapped. Next slide, please. That followed with the creation of the Northumberland Woodland Creation Partnership, which was formed to facilitate a step change in the pace and extent of appropriate tree planting in the county. And those 14 organisations have come together. Their kind of key stakeholders would be consultees on any larger scale forestry creation. So really to kind of get everyone together in a room to agree kind of principles and ways forward has been quite constructive. And the mission of the partnership is to reduce the impacts of climate change, enhance biodiversity, nature and landscapes, to boost the rural economy, improve recreational access and amenities, and lead a post-COVID-19 green recovery in the county. Next slide, please. We formally launched the programme back in November, when this really sort of started the 3rd phase of the programme, with wider engagement with landowners, farmers and communities to really look at where the opportunities were for tree planting at the various scales. Next slide, please. So why are we doing this? Tree planting and tree establishment can have a full range of benefits and can provide lots of different ecosystem services, from carbon sequestration, so climate mitigation, through to improvements in water quality, in air quality, in soil quality. They're places for us to go and use and recreate and stay fit and healthy. But it's also the homes for wildlife and for special habitats. And it's really key that any type of tree planting, if it's done in the right place and the right way, can provide multiple benefits. So it doesn't necessarily need to be one thing as a focus. Next slide, please. And just to home in, obviously, for the biodiversity session we're on tonight, forests and woodlands can be, as we've said, are homes to special creatures and mammals in particular that we all sort of have a fondness for. The red squirrel in particular is quite an iconic species in Northumberland. We're seeing pine martins returning to woodlands in Northumberland. We've got water voles being returned into Kielder through the Restoring Ratty project. And they're home to a vast variety of different species, and they need woodlands, large woodlands in certain places to be resilient, but also woodlands which connect and provide networks and corridors for the different species to travel in between. So sort of planting trees is good on that front. Next slide, please. So what are we doing as a team? Essentially, we provide a free service to explore and discuss the opportunities for woodland creation, how they could work for farmers and for landowners' businesses, how they could be funded, and how communities can be involved. But we don't have an obligation to plant. It's very much sort of working in partnership and engaging with landowners and farmers to sort of see what the options are. And on the screen now, just some of the funding options available from the Forestry Commission, the Woodland Trust, Forestry England, and the County Council through the Local Authority Treescape Fund. So it's just sort of some of the options which we're looking and exploring as we're supporting landowners with some of the decisions they're making. Next slide, please. In addition to that, we've also been supporting the local services team and exploring the opportunities for future management of the council's existing 1,200 hectares of woodland. We've successfully secured funding through the Local Authority Treescape Fund for the first round, so last year, which has led to the planting of over 3,000 trees across the county, with additional trees being planted this autumn as part of that project. We're currently out for round 2 of the Local Authority Treescape Fund, so parish councils have been contacted to sort of see if we've got sites coming forward which we can plant next year. We've also been supporting communities and parish council with the Queen's Green Canopy Jubilee celebrations and some of the plantings going on there. And we're working in partnership with the recently launched North East Community Forest with schemes particularly around the county boundary and how their funding initiatives can tie in with the work we're doing as well. Next slide, please. So to get involved, as I mentioned, the Treescape Fund, if there are sort of blocks of land which could be planted in conjunction with the council, we're definitely interested to know about those areas. If you are a landowner or a land manager and interested in planting trees, then please do get in touch and we can have a discussion around that. If you're interested in volunteering, we're looking to pull together kind of volunteer register for opportunities to plant trees across the county. And we've also launched a kind of sponsorship scheme where if you're a corporation or would like to sponsor tree planting in this county, there are details on our website. And if you just go to the last slide there, Hazel, there are the links. So there's the website at the top and the inquiries inbox for the team at the bottom there. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Mark. And after hearing about the forest, we're gonna talk to Anne, an ecologist at Northumberland County Council, to tell us a bit more about the kind of biodiversity side of things.
Hello, everybody. So I've been working in Northumberland for over 20 years now. And my first job straight out of university was working for Blythe Valley Borough Council. And I actually led a thing called Local Agenda 21, which was all about sustainability and encouraging people to, the catchphrase was think global, act local. And we did quite a lot of work to encourage communities to do things like planting community orchards, which I'm possibly going to regret telling Katie, and encouraging people to do all sorts of things for sustainability. Climate change was part of it then, but without the focus that it has now. It was much more about sustainable development. But it's really good to see big organisations like the council really trying to make such a huge difference. So I wanted to start by defining what biodiversity is. So in 1992, there was the Rio Earth Convention, and that agreed a definition of what biodiversity is. So it says, and forgive me, I have it on the other screen, the variability among living organisms from all sources, including, among other things, terrestrial, marine, and other aquatic ecosystems, and the ecological complexes of which they are part, which includes diversity within species, between species, and of ecosystems. So basically, it's everything and how everything relates to everything else. So next slide, please, Hazel. So everybody who lives here knows how special Northumberland is. But I think until you work with a lot of the protections that sites have, you don't realise quite how special it is. So we have 14 special areas of conservation. These are internationally designated sites. They're part of the Natura 2000 network, which goes right across Europe, and tries to create a network of habitats where species can move. And one of the main themes of my talk is about space for nature. So when I come on later on to our coast, I'll say a little bit more about how some of our species spend some of their life cycle here and some of it in other countries. So next slide, please. We have got 7 special protection areas, which are internationally designated for birds, 1 marine special protection area, which is for tern species, guillemots, puffins, etc., and 4 Ramsar Convention wetlands, which are an international convention on sites that are used primarily by wading birds. Next, please. We've got 9 national nature reserves, 2 areas of outstanding natural beauty, 3 marine conservation zones, and 1 national park. So we're quite busy, and we're very, very special. It's hard to leave once you're an ecologist and you start here. We've got hundreds of sites of special scientific interest, and that's the River Coker at Rothbury, local wildlife sites, country parks, forests, and grassland. Next, please. And some really special wildlife. So the little crustacean there you can see is a white-clawed crayfish. We have 3 rivers in our county that hold populations of those, which are internationally important. That's an endangered species. I'm very lucky that I have a license to handle them. I show them to children. I will show them to anybody who wants to see them because they are the most amazing creature, and Northumberland is a really important place for them. And then on the right, you have a purple sandpiper. Some of our coastal sites are internationally important for that species, and they hang around here in winter and stuff their little faces, and then they go off to breed in the Northern Arctic. Next slide, please. So how are climate change and biodiversity linked? Human impacts are already making a big difference to our wildlife. Development, farming, recreation can all come together to squeeze wildlife into smaller spaces. And as temperature rises, this squeeze increases. We do have species that are specialists as well, so they don't really have anywhere else to go if the habitat they rely on is harmed. If we have coastal erosion, we've got smaller spaces for our seabird populations to feed and breed. Rivers can be impacted by water extraction, changes in weather patterns and pollution, and complex systems rely on so many different factors all coming together to support them that if crashes happen, they can be catastrophic. Next slide, please. So recently you might have heard over the summer about guillemot deaths on the coastline. Now, nobody still is entirely sure what led to it, but the thing that there is a consensus on is that climate change has exacerbated this effect. We encountered quite a few of these birds behaving very, very oddly when we were on holiday in Scotland. And it was amazing to be that close to wildlife, but at the same time, very sad when you knew that something was very much amiss. And next slide, please. So as I think it was Nick said earlier, we can't separate biodiversity from climate change and things that we rely on to support us, because the definition of biodiversity, that's everything and how everything relates to each other, naturally includes humans. So we rely on nature as much as nature needs us to support it. So we get fertilizer, soil improvers, pollinators, flood retention, clean water, clean air, shade, protection from wind and rain, and they really soak up carbon. And biodiversity is a great carbon sink. And because I knew Mark was going to talk about trees, I thought I'd talk about something else. So this is from a Natural England DEFRA publication, and it shows all of the various habitats and how much carbon they store. And as you can see, blanket bog, fen on deep peat, and raised bog are the real stars here. And again, it's habitat that we have in Northumberland, and we're very, very lucky to have it. So next slide, please. And this, what we're, in the past, there was quite a lot of tree planting, and particularly conifer planting on peat. We don't tend to do it anymore. And we're seeing an awful lot of our landowners, including the MOD, really work hard to restore peatland habitats, and it works really well. If you take plugs from the wet bits of peat and put them in the soil somewhere else, if you make sure it's wet, they will start to regenerate, and it's really, really hopeful. Next slide. I just threw this one in because I know that I'm talking to an audience full of people who really want to make a difference locally. So the council can do the big things and landowners can do big things, but everybody can do something. Now, small ponds are actually really good at capturing carbon. So I've made ponds in school nature areas before, made out of a washing up bucket with some rocks in. And I strongly suggest everybody goes out and plants several trees and makes a small pond, please. Next slide, please. So this is our other real climate champion. This is seagrass, and we have it around Budle Bay and Lindisfarne, and birds love it. It's part of the reason our coast is internationally important for birds. It holds millions of tiny invertebrates, feeds all kinds of fish and mammals, including internationally important breeding populations of grey seals and all of the birds that I've mentioned a few times already. And in one study on the southwest coast, the top 100 centimetres of 500 hectares of seagrass held the equivalent of 10,500 people's carbon emissions for a year. So it might not look like much when the tide's out, but when the tide's in, that is an Amazon rainforest under the sea. And it's definitely part of our blue carbon sink that we have. Next slide, please. So how does all this work together? Different systems have different sensitivities, and extreme weather can increase can increase problems that are already there, or make things that aren't problems suddenly become problems. So at our house, on our coast, the sites I've just mentioned with the seagrass are suffering from eutrophication, and it's not just agricultural runoff. I've just realised it does say that. Agricultural runoff in this instance is just an example of how, if you have extreme weather events, you increase runoff and you actually just continue to add to that problem. And then you lose the carbon sink that you had because it's been impacted by the extreme weather events. So you end up with this feedback loop where the very thing that's helping you ends up being damaged by climate change itself. So that's one of the things we really need to avoid. Next slide, please, Hazel. And what does the council do? Our countryside services colleagues look after 1,200 hectares of woodland, including 170 hectares of ancient woodland, species-rich grassland, 23 local nature reserves, and 6 country parks. And in the planning department, we have a team of ecologists. We contribute to the local plan and neighbourhood plans, and we provide advice on around 2,000 planning applications a year. And our job is to make sure the impacts on biodiversity are minimised, and we make as much room as we can for nature in new developments. Next slide, please. So these are 2 things that we are really good at getting into new developments. Hedgehog highways, so little notches cut in the bottom of fences, and they make a real difference, and they don't cost very much money. We also really push for swift bricks, which are incredible. They're just put into the last course of bricks on a building. They're really cheap, and all sorts of birds will use them. Next slide, please. We also work with minerals restoration. So after gravel extraction or open cast coal, we make sure that the sites are restored with the landowners. And this is at Hedgeley, just north of Powburn. And it's species-rich grassland and wetland, which is alive. I was there today, and the amount of lapwings and wading birds flying around, it was absolutely amazing. So do go and visit, because it's lovely and you can walk around. Next slide, please. Then we have space for shorebirds. So we started to try and think of creative ways of reducing the amount of recreational disturbance on birds at the coast. So they breed on the beaches, and they also feed on the beaches in the winter. So different kinds of birds will do the different kinds of things. And what happens is the more people and off-lead dogs are on the beach, the more the birds are disturbed, and that really does impact their ability to fly all the way north and breed. So developers give us money, and we use the money to pay for a wardening service on the coast. And that's my friend Richard and his van and all of his leaflets. And he works with people and talks to them as they're on the beach. And the most cool thing he does is he has dog rangers. So dogs sign up and they become dog rangers, and they agree to not chase the birds and give the birds space. And it's going really, really well. He's had contact from people in California asking him how he's doing it. So it's something that we should be really proud of as a county council. It's really making a difference. Okay, next slide, please. So this is a quick rundown of the other stuff we do. And as you can see, we're very busy. We do lead on local nature recovery, and Northumberland was one of the 5 pilot areas. And this is probably the most significant thing that's happening at the moment in terms of giving nature space. So it allows us to look strategically at all of the different natural habitats that we have, the potential to improve them and make sure they're linked up. So as this squeeze happens with changing temperatures, animals can move and have links between different areas so that they can absorb the shocks that might come. We also host the Northumberland Coast AONB team, support the North Pennines AONB team, who are hosted in Durham, and they've restored over 35,000 hectares of peat to date. The AONBs do farming and protected landscape schemes supporting farmers. We host the Berwickshire and North Northumberland Marine Nature Partnership, play an active role in the Peat Partnership, and we lead on local government initiatives, biodiversity net gain and nitrate neutrality, both of which are very new, and we're developing our plans for those at the moment, and hopefully I'll be able to come back and tell you a little bit more about it. Biodiversity net gain is asking developers to have a 10% net gain for biodiversity in all of their developments, and it's enshrined in the Environment Act, which was enacted last year. We also look after wildlife on council-owned sites and buildings, and County Hall itself has around 30 bat roosts, and we work with other organisations and offer friendly advice. So we do quite a lot. So next slide, please. And what can you do? So again, nature needs space, so give it as much space as you can, and no matter how small it is, it all does add up. There's a really good resource on the Royal Horticultural Society called Plants for Pollinators, and what that allows you to do is to search their plant database for plants which are really, really good for bees and butterflies and hoverflies and all of the other pollinators which are really struggling at the moment. Next slide, please. And you can garden for wildlife. A little bit of gravel with a lavender bush in the middle of it will attract so many butterflies, and it is a really, really, really cheap and easy way of making a difference, and it looks quite pretty as well. You could plant a meadow area, and again, supporting our local farmers, because I'm very keen on that, living where I do up in Northumberland. We have in the Coquet Valley a farmer who grows meadow seed, and he sells it for all sorts of purposes: minerals restoration, farm diversification, and stewardship farms. And it's incredible. And if you ever do get a chance, please do go up. It's amazing. No Mow May. You might have noticed white clover really comes out in May, and it is a valuable nectar source. So if you can leave your lawnmower as long as possible, that would be brilliant. It's a constant fight with me and my husband every May. Dandelions are also incredible nectar plants and used by lots of finch species. They come and eat the seeds. So if we can leave it for as long as possible, that would be brilliant. And avoiding peat compost. Peat is required to be where it is. It's best not to use it. There are really good alternatives, and some of them are made with wool. So that gives farmers another market for their wool. Dig a pond. I think I've already covered that. Avoid slug pellets and pesticides. They will end up in a barn owl at some time. And slug pellets are really harmful for hedgehogs. Next slide, please. So the other things you can do, easy things: put up a birdhouse or a bat box and make a hedgehog highway. I love this story. There's a village in Oxfordshire that's put all these they've made little holes in walls and built bridges and ramps and put holes in fences for hedgehogs. And it's just incredible how a community can come together, do something so small that makes such a big difference for a species that's really, really struggling. Next slide, please. So the other thing that would really help us, because we do know that shocks and changes in temperature are moving wildlife around all the time. So if you could report any sightings, especially if it's something weird and unusual, to Eric Northeast, the Environmental Records Information Centre, that helps people like me when we come to look at planning applications, or when we as a council come to plant new areas of forest or anything like that, to have a really good idea of what's there. And a lot of the time, people going out and doing professional surveys are doing it at a single snapshot in time, whereas people who live locally are there all the time and know what the crack is when it comes to their local area. So also give wildlife space yourself in how you behave when you're out and about in wild spaces. Just give wildlife space. So, and especially on the coast. I almost stumbled across a nesting curlew on Saturday, so I'm as guilty of just wandering blindly as much as anyone else. The other thing you can do is volunteer. So you can volunteer for CAN, you can volunteer for Space for Shorebirds or Coast Care, the Northumberland Wildlife Trust, the National Trust, and there are lots of local friends of groups. And one of the first jobs I ever did in Northumberland was to help set up the Friends of Holywell Dean. And before I did this, I checked to see if they're still going, and they are. So if you're down in the southeast of the county, they're a great bunch, and Holywell Dean is beautiful. So, and that's all from me.
Lovely, thank you very much, Anne. So we've got some questions. I've got two straight away, and then I'm going to pass on to Matt for the others, which we've got. Anne, the first question is for you. Sometimes it can look really messy when there is plant debris like fallen twigs and leaves, animal droppings, seaweed on beaches or overgrown grasses. Why is it important that we leave these natural spaces untidy? And I know your husband likes to mow the grass, and I think lots of us do. So there's always a bit of a dilemma. So why should we just pause and just think?
I'm not saying that everywhere should be messy. I'm saying that we should leave messy bits, so messy corners. If anybody's ever lifted up a load of leaf litter, they'll see there's loads of things crawling around in it. And going back to my hedgehogs again, because they're the species that are really suffering from this because people are over tidy. There's lots of little insects in there that hedgehogs will eat, that birds will eat. Even birds that eat seeds might feed those to their young. They might grab the worms and the little bits of basically maggots and things and feed those. So it's a really, really important food resource for lots of creatures. In terms of gardens and things, again, the more we mow, the less pollen there is, the less nectar there is. So the less the pollinators have to eat. So bees and butterflies really do rely on that. And as I mentioned before, finches really do like to nibble on a thistle as well. So it would be great if people could just make a little bit of space. And you can make it into a feature as well, of course. But the main reason why I'm concerned about this is because we used to have a big house martin colony on my street. And slowly over the years, people have put up netting and stopped them nesting on the houses because they didn't like the droppings. Whereas I didn't mind, because I think if they've come all the way from Africa, I don't really mind them pooing on my house for a couple of weeks in a year. I think they've earned it, you know. But that colony's been wiped out, and that's just from lots of little decisions that people have made about tidiness, and that's wiped out an entire breeding colony of house martins that was about 20 strong when I moved in here 6 years ago. So it's that idea that every tidying up decision that we make is something that our neighbours might be doing and another neighbour might be doing. Whereas if we all made a decision to put a little, even a metre by metre square where we could be scruffy, or where we dumped all the leaf litter in a corner of the garden where people don't go, then that all adds up as well.
Yes, that's lovely, Anne. Thank you very much. I mean, as a farmer myself with a small family farm, it is really important that we have some new government initiatives that will help us move away from thinking only about providing, beer for Budweiser or wheat for McVitie's, and actually having some sections of the farm that we would devote entirely into nature. And hopefully we'll get there soon on that.
But we are very lucky that we have some amazing farms, particularly the hill farms, where there is so much biodiversity, and particularly the upland birds. So, yeah, I think a lot of our farmers deserve a lot of credit.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so the next question is to Mark. Mark, why is it important? Sorry, what is important to consider when you're thinking about planting new trees or woodlands? So this could be for anyone, just even thinking about planting 2 or 3 trees in the corner of their garden or at the local park. So what's important?
I guess to start off with, it's understanding why you're planting, sort of what the objectives are, both in terms of short term and longer term. Is it something for amenity value? Is it landscape? Is it to boost nature, to protect watercourses, or for a kind of more productive purpose at the end? So being clear with kind of the objectives and kind of understanding of why you're planting is a really key starting point. Probably the next bit is understanding the constraints to planting. So we've covered a lot today in terms of some of the environmental constraints, whether that's peat, peaty soils, priority habitats, or protected species like breeding waders. So understanding what constraints there are to planting and the potential impact that planting will have on those species and habitats will be quite key. In addition to that, the historical environment features, obviously we're quite rich with archaeological features in the county. So again, understanding the potential impact that planting trees could have on those. And then the social impact as well, and engagement with communities and understanding sort of the benefits and the potential impacts that tree planting can have. And then just to finish off, if there's sort of planting at scale, there's what's called the UK Forestry Standard, which is kind of the framework and kind of rule book, as it were, for tree planting in the country. And that kind of sets out the regulation in terms of what the Forestry Commission can approve for a due process, and then understanding how your planting can be funded going forward with the various funding options available. So a bit to consider, but if you go through all of those sort of points, then at the end of it, you should hopefully have a really positive, successful planting scheme.
Great. Does the Forestry Commission do an idiot's guide, for want of a better word, for the types of trees that do well in the UK and what their specific qualities and qualities are?
Yes, so there are guidance on the .gov.uk website from the Forestry Commission in terms of the benefits of trees, what trees to be planted. On top of that, Forest Research have a tool called the Ecological Site Classification, which you can go on a map, you can pick your location exactly where you are, and it will give a kind of an overview of the different tree species which is suitable for that part of the world, their growing sort of qualities, how well they're suited, and what some of the limiting factors are. So there are sources of information out there to help guide which species would be suitable for areas of land. Great.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. I'm going to pass over to Matt now to take the next question and answer session. Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Sanderson. Yep, so thank you so much for the questions that we've currently got in the box. So we're just going to go through them, probably like in the order they're written. There's a few people who might need to shuffle them around, so hopefully we'll get to your questions. The first question, which is from Kathy, which I'm going to hand off to Nick, is: given that Northumberland is so well off in terms of carbon sequestration, shouldn't we be aiming higher in terms of carbon reduction, because the rest of the country will struggle much more than we will? can you assure me that even if we do manage to get net zero by 2030, we'll still keep going? Nick.
Yeah, thank you very much for your question. Yes is the simple answer. The more complicated answer is that it's still going to be a challenge for us in Northumberland to get to net zero. Whilst we do enjoy some really great natural resources that contribute huge carbon benefit, we've still got 686,000 tonnes of CO2 annually emitted that we need to eliminate before we get to net zero, which is very challenging. So that's something that obviously that we're working towards. Our climate action plan sets out how we want to tackle the emissions from heating, from transport, and other sources from industry, so that we can reduce that deficit, that difference, and we can get ourselves to net zero. But we completely understand that we are in a sort of advantageous position, and that if particularly urban environments, cities are going to and ultimately the whole country is going to get to net zero, then places like Northumberland will have to be carbon negative in order to be able to achieve that. So absolutely, we want to go further. We want to be pushed beyond the net zero target, but it's a case of kind of taking one step at a time.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. I'd just add to that Kathy, and that your political colleagues have also mentioned the phrase negative emissions. So it isn't just an ambition as officers; it's something which we are engaged in a conversation around. But it's going to be a challenge to get to zero. We'd love to have that problem, but yeah, we will definitely keep going. So the next question, which I'm going to hand to Mark. Mark, for the Great Northumberland Forest, do you screen planting sites for peat? I'm imagining some sort of some sort of GIS layer showing you where the deeper peat deposits are, and that's from Andy. Yeah, Mark, do you want to talk about peat and trees?
Yes, so as a starting point, on the Great Northumberland Forest pages on the Northumberland County Council website, we have a story map which details where there is current tree cover across the county, but also, as you scroll down, looks at where there are the greatest potential or least constrained areas for tree planting. And that takes away the deeper peat lenses that we know about. And that's probably something to stress. Natural England have a peat map, and that's used in terms of some of our constraints mapping. So we know where most of the deep peat is, but that will not replace the need for specific surveys to be conducted on a site-by-site basis to ensure that we fully understand any constraints to planting, and that will include priority habitats, deep peat, and protected species. So there is a process, a regulatory process, which the Forestry Commission oversee, and for planting schemes to be approved, they need to go through that process and make sure all the checks have been done prior to planting.
Cool, thanks, Mark. Yeah, sorry, losing the thread a little bit there. Yeah, the next question it's a long question, but basically to summarize, we're doing a lot around CO2, but there's examples, and the specific examples around an allotment or burning organic waste, which then creates kind of other pollutants. Is there anything we can do more broadly? So, and that's from Martin. So it's interesting that you mentioned that we get quite a lot of inquiries into our inbox, and I've had a couple this week as it happens, about things along these lines, but also about contractors, not council employees, I hasten to add, sort of weed killing and using various kind of chemicals and things. And I think what will be useful for us is if we've got this particular example, which is great, but we need more examples and more evidence to be able to do something with it. So the more you can give us specific examples, and if we can build up that body of evidence of things that are happening, the more we can then interact with our communities and do something. So the answer to your question is yes, we would love to, but we need a body of evidence to be able to kind of justify why we do something. So yeah, it is an important area, but we just need to kind of get the specific examples in so we could work with our public protection team to engage in that sort of dialogue, to want for a better way of describing it. Next question, which Mark will be over to you again. So basically it's about the economics of the Great Northumberland Forest. So in developing parts of private land, who's paying for the trees to be planted? The trees may well become a source of income, as well as reducing pollution. If they're sold to offset carbon emissions elsewhere, then who will kind of benefit from that? So I guess there's a general question around kind of paying for private land. If there's carbon offset, who benefits, and will the council benefit from offsetting contributions of newly planted trees on our own land?
So quite a bit to unpack in this. I'll try and cover the bits to start off with. So we are a DEFRA funded project hosted by the County Council in terms of our delivery. And our main focus is engaging with private and public landowners to see the bulk of the vision of more trees to be planted across the county. So the council isn't in a position of buying land, and that's not what the intention is. It's more about engagement with private landowners to facilitate and support them planting trees on their land. In terms of the funding to support that, there are various mechanisms or various pots of cash to do that. The Forestry Commission manage the main source of funding, which is the England Woodland Creation Offer, and that funds tree planting down to 1 hectare and bigger, and really has a focus on planting to improve biodiversity of the other ecosystem services, which we've talked about tonight, as well as carbon. There are other sources of funding, including the Woodland Trust and other private sources of finance as well to support that. Carbon can be sold on the market depending on the type of scheme, and there's further information about that from the Woodland Carbon Code website, and they have quite rigorous tests in terms of when carbon finance is applicable. So crudely, if it's a productive planted scheme with timber as a source of income in the future, it's not as likely to get carbon finance as, say, a long-term native woodland retention low management block, because that woodland may not necessarily have happened without carbon finance, whereas a productive woodland, the economics just from the timber would make it feasible to do in any rate. So there are sort of eligibility criteria around carbon, but essentially the council is not claiming or taking on board any of the carbon credits generated from planting. We're here to facilitate and to support private landowners planting trees, and then if they want to look at carbon as a potential source, it's down to them. It's their decision.
We've then, actually, before we get on to our questions about mowing, next question, which I can probably take. So recently there have been reports of water companies in other counties pouring sewage for thousands of hours into waterways. Is there any evidence of this in Northumberland, and can you afford sufficient staff to monitor this? So I can talk about this from Rosemary, about that in a kind of specific example from a meeting I was in recently up in Berwick-upon-Tweed. So in Berwick-upon-Tweed, there is an issue along these lines which is known to the community, and there's a community group which is Surfers Against Sewage to kind of get that out, and they're campaigning quite actively around that, and working with the Environment Agency and with colleagues in our neighbourhood services team to work with Northumberland Water. So it's one of these areas, Rosemary, where yes, we don't have lots of resource available for people to kind of constantly monitor that. It's something which the Environment Agency actually is responsible for. It is something where I think we do need local intelligence, and the reason why we know about that up in Berwick is because there is a local community who are kind of engaged in that. So we know about that specific example, but if there are other examples which has prompted the question, it will be useful for you to make us aware of that, and we'll kind of connect that into the right areas of our team and also the Environment Agency. So that's that one. There's then a series of questions which are basically a theme on no mow May and cutting grass. I'm very interested in the answer to this for a different reason. I'm going to hand that to Nick to begin with, and then I think Anne's going to jump in and do a bit of supplementary. So yeah, Nick and then Anne.
Thanks, Matt. So we're not joined tonight by colleagues from our local services team who actually sort of oversee this, but I have some information from them which I'm kind of happy to provide. So on the highway verge, we cut a 1 metre strip once annually during the months of June and July. So for the majority of the county, we kind of do no mow May, and that's been pretty successful. And you'll notice that on the verges of the roads outside of residential areas as you drive around the county. And the reason we mow that is to improve lines of sight, as I've mentioned, and there's other reasons around long vegetation, and Anne will come on to kind of the benefits of mowing in a minute. So within also, I should add, there are approximately 80 areas of verge identified across the county where we delay cutting until September because of flora of particular interest, and we wanted to kind of allow it to seed. And we work in partnership with the AOMBs and the National Park to help identify those areas. If there are areas that you could benefit from not being cut, then please do contact us and let us know. And we're very happy to consider these. Within our residential areas, within kind of 30-mile-an-hour zones, the verges are cut more frequently, and this is currently around 10 to 13 cuts per year. Reduction in cutting these requires kind of very careful consideration. Now, we are very happy to consider it, but we need to kind of have the community behind that decision, because on the flip side, we often get a lot of complaints if we don't mow those areas because of the way that it looks. So the more kind of information we have and momentum we have behind communities asking us not to mow those areas, the more of a mandate that creates and the more we can kind of consider it. So please do get in touch with us and get your friends and neighbours too if they're of the same mind, and we'll be very happy to kind of consider that in the round. I think, Anne, you're able to say a little bit more about the biodiversity of benefits of mowing and why we do it and why it can sometimes be good.
Yeah, well, it's not so much the biodiversity benefits of mowing, it's more the dangers of not doing anything. So at the beginning of my talk, I said that basically biodiversity is about everything and how it relates to everything else. So whenever you're dealing with something like that, nothing's simple and everything's quite complicated before you even get into what we can afford to do. So in most cases, unless you've got really poor soil, if you don't mow, if you don't cut at all or graze, you do end up with quite rank grassland. So you get very dominant species coming in and then you lose that floral interest anyway. So for some of the sites you've mentioned with that annual cut, actually the annual cut is benefiting the flora that's there because it's removing that rank grassland and stop it becoming too dominant. And that's basically it, and it is complicated. Ideally, we would be managing all of our verges as hay meadows, but sadly, they don't add up to anything that would be even remotely economically viable to do that as a hay meadow. And whether we could feed roadside vegetation to livestock is probably problematic. So yes, it's just that really, that it's not as simple as not mowing, because species-rich grasslands only exist where they're managed well, either through low-level grazing or through cut and take once a year.
So yeah, just waiting for the kind of questions update. Yeah, next question from Rosemary. Roughly how many trees in Northumberland and what proportion were destroyed by the recent storms? So it's quite a lot of post-storm work going on. I'm going to ask Mark, who's probably got the best answer on the tree audit that we've completed. Mark.
So in terms of a specific tree count, I don't have that number to hand. I can tell you that in the county we have just shy of 100,000 hectares of woodland, trees outside of woodland, and hedgerows sort of added all up together. It's one of the first things we did to kind of get a baseline, and again that information is available on our story map. And that equates to just shy of 20% of the county. So in terms of all the mapped woodlands and sort of matrix of habitats that we've got together, it's about 20% of the county. In terms of a storm, Storm Arwen hits, and initial figures were in the region of about 2,000 hectares, which were damaged. And then subsequently we've had, I think, 4 other named storm events, which have contributed to storm damage in the county. We're currently estimating somewhere around 4,000 to 7,000 hectares. It's a bit difficult to know exactly, as we're still collecting information from various landowners, and the Forestry Commission are coordinating that response to fully understand the amount of wind blow, both in terms of some of the larger blocks, but also we've obviously seen trees down across roads, small blocks, shelter belts and pieces. The county has been hit significantly hard, but we're still coming to grips with exactly how much. But probably in that region of 4,000 to 7,000 is our estimate at the moment.
Next question is from Ali, and there's one further down from Ali. So Ali, the answer to your question further down about service against sewage, yes, we'd love to meet with you. So Hazel's probably just typing that right now, so we'll organise that. That will be great. In terms of seagrass, so we're just in the process of starting to think about what goes into the next version of the climate action plan. So the current climate action plan is a 2-year plan, which ends at the end of this year. The next action plan will contain an update on a lot of what we've been doing and the next set of plans, but it will also start to include some things which have emerged since we drafted the other one. And I would put sequestration in different ways, and seagrass been one example of that, been something that we definitely want to start to understand better. And the next question around wildlife corridors probably fits into that as well. There's a definite gap in what we've currently published around biodiversity, but working with Anne and other colleagues in the ecology team, the idea is that going forward, we'll start to integrate those two strategies much more closely. I don't know, Anne, do you want to say anything specifically about some of the sort of ecology strategy work that's kind of underway?
Yeah, well, it's brilliant to have some things that we feel like we've been sitting in our nerdy little corners going on about for literally decades, really becoming government policy, and us being one of the pilots for the local nature recovery strategy is really important as well. I see Mark nodding, so he's obviously so again, going back, one of my first ever jobs was the Gosforth Park to Cramlington Wildlife Corridor. And there's been a lot of initiatives over the years. We had a biodiversity action plan for Northumberland, and there was a living landscapes programme that the National Trust the Wildlife Trust were leading on. And all of that stuff is really feeding into and informing the local nature recovery strategies. And we're lucky that Northumberland's such a great place that you tend to keep people for a long time. So there are a lot of old heads saying, oh, what about that thing? And actually, the guy who wrote the biodiversity audit for the North East was strongly involved in the local nature recovery strategy work. So what we're starting to do is to map out where partnered work is, where projects that we always wanted to do but couldn't quite resource are, how different habitats are linked, how there's layers to what they can achieve as well. So certainly my big favourite thing is to try and improve floodplain meadows, because they are so valuable for so many different things, and they have a massive role in flood prevention and water quality as well. And it's kind of linked back to what you were asking about sewage earlier. We've got nutrient neutrality now, which is another layer on top of net gain and local nature recovery strategies for us to try and create wetland habitats and try and create sinks that soak up nitrates, in particular for the Lindisfarne catchment. So there's a lot of opportunity, in what the local nature recovery strategy will start to do is start to really map those wildlife corridors and allow us to focus where our resources go, and that helps with Mark's work as well. So we've had thing after thing after thing and layers just dropping down on us recently, and trying to get your head around it technically is quite hard. But again, I would always say that local communities and local people probably know better than we do where their local wildlife corridors are. And again, going back to Nick's point, if you know of a species rich verge, the threshold's pretty high in terms of whether we can afford to have it as one of our special ones, but it can be considered. And we need to be encouraging people to tell us where their important sites are and include that, so all of it comes together and we can start to put this money that's coming in and the push for action into places that people tell us about.
Thanks, Anne. And I'm going to connect that into the next question a little bit. So the next question is from Anne. We're starting to update our biodiversity surveys, including training volunteers. Is there any funding available to help towards the printing of the update? So the answer to that question is yes. So we're about to launch a community chest fund specific to climate change. The idea is that we've got a recurring pot of money. It's £50,000 for kind of the whole county. So the idea is that we'll use this money to fund kind of small community-led local activities, which could include, you know, biodiversity surveys. It could be kind of building on some of the things that Anne said, that you want to run some events where you actually get some people to kind of do some of that kind of audit work, and you want to turn into more of a sort of an engagement event for your community. And we're going to publish the sort of the specific criteria and guidance in the next, probably I'm looking at Hazel and Kim, week or so, and then we're going to invite bids in and try and get the kind of funding out as quick as we can. And a lot of the things that we've talked about today would meet you know, I'm sure the criteria for some of that funding. And the idea is like I say, it's to help drive local community action around climate change, around biodiversity, around a lot of the things that we've talked about this evening. Just conscious of time a bit. So in terms of other questions, right, got some questions about, two questions about North of Tyne Citizens Assembly and North of Tyne Group, basically kind of rolled into one. I'm gonna ask Nick to give us a quick response to those for Rosemary. Nick.
Yeah, thanks very much for the question, and apologies if you hear background noise here. My children have just been brought up the stairs for their bath, so there's a bit of chaos going on behind the door. So yeah, there's a couple of questions here around collaboration with our kind of neighbouring local authorities, and then more specifically the North of Tyne Citizens Assembly, which I'll kind of answer together. So we work very closely with neighbouring authorities, primarily our sort of neighbouring authorities to the south in what we call the LA7, the 7 northeast local authorities, and we collaborate around kind of energy through the local enterprise partnership Energy Hub in particular, which distributes funding and where we meet kind of regularly to discuss some of our energy schemes and share best practice there. And also through kind of other aspects as well. There's also NECO, the Northeast Climate Change Coalition, which is a sort of third sector organisation which helps the local authorities and other stakeholders work together on climate change, and does a fantastic job of that as well. And then of course there is the North of Tyne Combined Authority, which we work closely with and obviously are a member of. In terms of the Citizens Assembly itself, we received kind of the results of the Citizens Assembly, as did Newcastle and North Tyneside, and we were asked to kind of look at how we were addressing those already and what we could do additionally. It's important to kind of remember that there were a few strands of those recommendations that were very sort of specific to city and urban environments, and others that were more specific to the rural environments of Northumberland. The of what the Citizens Assembly recommended.
Nick, I'm just going to cut
Going to
across
publish
you.
that plan. Oh,
Sorry, Nick, you're back now. We lost you for a second. You might need to just repeat everything you just said, please.
everything.
From the Citizens Assembly, we kind of heard that bit about kind of different recommendations, but then we lost you a little bit.
Okay, so the vast majority of recommendations are covered in our existing climate action plan, but those that aren't are being considered and will be included in our next climate action plan, which will be published in the new year. And we're very grateful for the insight that that's given us, that process.
Great. Okay, thanks, Nick. So yeah, just next question. What support has been offered to Northumberland's community climate champions, and what impact outcomes have been achieved so far? Hazel, do you want to give us a quick summary of where we are with the community climate change champions, please?
Yeah, can do. So our kind of new cohort that were kind of brought on board in October last year, they've just been sending in their kind of local climate action plans now, which we've been reviewing and adding feedback on. So those kind of outline what these groups are looking to achieve in their local areas, and kind of opens up that conversation so that we can help provide feedback from our kind of our knowledge areas and the different members of our team that work on the different kind of priority action plans. So what's brilliant about that is therefore we also have a kind of an oversight of what's kind of coming down the line and where we can support these community groups going forward. But I think as Matt kind of spoke to a bit earlier on, the main thing that's really coming up in terms of supporting them is the opening of the Northumberland Climate Fund, which is specifically focused around our kind of community groups, our charities, to support them to take that climate action. And these will be, sums of money to help them with kind of outreach events, but also start thinking at kind of like slightly larger projects and looking into those options.
Thanks, Hazel. Yeah, next question. What would you like the national government to do in support of your work that hasn't been done? That question, Rosemary, may take a long time to answer, so I'll kind of answer it in a slightly broad way. So we've got a specific focus within our team on policy, and if I kind of give you an example, which actually isn't connected to biodiversity, but it's connected to synthetic fuel. So synthetic fuel is something which mimics kerosene, and currently if you use synthetic fuel to power a vehicle, the tax regime is really beneficial, and it promotes that. If you use synthetic fuel to heat your home, then actually the tax regime is different and it's quite prohibitive. So what we're doing at the moment is flushing out very specific things, and we are lucky enough to have Councillor Sanderson as the leader, which we can then feed up into the machinery of government and ask for support on specific things. So the most recent example of that was the local electricity networks, which got pushed through full council. So we've got a kind of pretty, I guess, sort of, what's the word? Kind of, is it effective? I don't know yet, but we've got a process in place to flush these things out, so we can do this in a kind of evidence-based and a kind of coherent way. So there's a few of these examples emerging. That will be kind of the one that's sort of front of mind at the moment, but there are quite a lot of them as we get into the detail, which we're kind of pushing through the machinery. So that will be an example of that. Any other specific things, what's happening about the housing reg? So yeah, so that's another great example. So we are currently working with our planning team specifically to look at how we impact the local plan in as climate conscious way as possible. And again, that is going to flush out a number of specific things, I'm sure, around kind of changes to policy. and one of those may well be things as basic as, which gets quite nerdy. Do you need planning permission to put 2 heat pumps into a larger home? Will be a really kind of practical and important example of where currently the legislation is probably not configured in the way that is most helpful, given what we're trying to do around net zero. So yeah, what pressures are you and other LAs putting on national government? Yeah, so I mean, that's a good question. I mean, through the groups that Nick mentioned, that's our mechanism for doing that, and raising that voice. And like all these things, when you're putting pressure onto national government, doing it as a collective is going to get much more traction and you know, kind of be more effective. And if we go back to the synthetic fuel example, that issue is really important for all rural economies with lots of properties off the gas grid, and so that would be something which we'd want to kind of go collectively for. So I think the more specific we can be, then the more likely we are to affect a change, and that will be the kind of the route that we do that through. Cool. Will this webinar be available online after this? Yes, it will. Anne is messaging me. Anne, do you want to jump in on that?
Yes, if the local nature recovery strategy had come up in questions, it's been a data gathering exercise, really, sort of a planning out things. There isn't really, as far as I'm aware, and Mark can maybe help me out here a bit, it's been about pulling people together and pulling information together up until now. So other than what I said before about if people know of good wildlife corridors near them to let us know, there's nothing to kind of show people yet, really.
Yeah, and sorry, I was thinking more connection to DEFRA, so it's probably like it's a good it's a good example. So and what Anne's referring to is the local nature recovery strategy. So it sort of talks a bit to the point Rose is raising around kind of LAs and pressure into government. So there's a number of things that government has done, and that's one example where we've gathered a body of evidence and then we push that back in as a set of, in this case, I think it was 10 local authorities who were asked to do that, which then informs their policy. So there's like a give and take process here where we identify things and push them in, and they identify things and push them back through.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of activity in DEFRA in particular in the last few months. So nutrient neutrality is one of those. Biodiversity net gain, there's been a lot of stuff on that coming to us recently, and then DEFRA are leading the local nature recovery strategies as well. So there is a great deal coming from government at the moment, and we're all just trying to figure it out and figure out what support there is for us. So we do know there's some money attached to nutrient neutrality. There's only a small amount attached to biodiversity net gain, so we are wondering how we're going to be able to resource it. But I'm sure we'll figure something out.
Cool.
I just come in as well, Matt.
Yeah, Mark, please. Yeah.
I mean, just to kind of echo some of Anne's thoughts. I mean, we're sort of through Great Northumberland Forest program, we feed in directly to DEFRA as well in terms of policy shifts, how things could be improved for tree planting and tree establishment. I think is a key thing. And agriculture and farming is under is going through a big change at the moment through transition, with changes to basic payments, to a full suite of kind of the requirements which land use has. And I think in the county we've been feeding into what will replace basic payment and countryside stewardship in the new form of the environmental land management scheme, and the different sort of tiers at which funding is available for the different benefits that they provide. I think the key aspect of that is it will be public money for public goods, but quite how that works is still being kind of worked out. And so we're getting bits and pieces of information ourselves, and we could feed back on that information, but more plans are coming, and it's due to roll out over the next couple of years. So it's going to be a really interesting time to sort of see what comes through from that.
Thanks. Thanks, Mark. Okay, so last thing before I hand back to Councillor Sanderson to just sort of give us a couple of closing remarks. So in terms of getting in touch with the team, Kim's about to post the email address in the chat, so I hope you should all see that, which is climate@northumberland.gov.uk. So if there are any questions or information, or you want to get in contact with us, that's our team inbox, and we can then hand it into different places. I've just messed up the agenda, so before I hand to Glenn, I just need to hand quickly to Hazel, who's just going to give us a quick update on our website and our kind of communication channel. Hazel.
Yes, thank you. So we've been thinking about the potential of having a specific climate website for Northumberland County Council's kind of action on climate change. And part of the kind of reasoning behind this is that we think that we can do better in terms of our outreach and information sharing than the way the website is currently set up for our pages. So what we really want this to be is we want it to be credible. We want the information resources to be trusted and true. We want it to be a space for education, so sharing that information it needs to be accessible to everybody, and also to kind of really help learners engage with it. We want it to be empowering, because we know that as a council, whilst we can do a lot, you know, climate change has to be something that everybody gets involved in, taking action, from individuals to groups to communities to businesses. But we need to be supportive of that as well. So this could provide a space that we can provide you with the resources and the information that you feel that you can go away and kind of take action. We want it to be a place of inspiration. There are so many people that are doing wonderful things in Northumberland already, and we really want to champion their voices and what they're doing. And yeah, want it to be engaging. We want it to be engaging for you, particularly as a person. So kind of the current situation, sometimes we've had some feedback that sometimes it's quite difficult to find some of the main climate change information, and it's not in comparison to some of the other functions that the website has. We also, the way it's structured, it's around our 7 priority action areas, which is really interesting, but it's not necessarily easy for you as a user to find that information and the resources that is kind of more tailored to yourselves, and then facilitating taking that action. So our vision for the website is centered around that understanding that everyone needs different things from these websites, and if we're going to help you take the action that we want to see, it has to be really user focused. So that's our vision: providing information that's relevant, providing resources to help you get involved and take action, and also, yeah, inspirational, sharing the stories and the amazing people of Northumberland, that's the action that's already going on. So that includes our resources, advice, and specific support and funding, because we know that lots of these actions do need that, and that's kind of one of the ways that we are kind of hoping to do that is through our climate fund, and we want it to be specific to the people who are using it. So a space for individuals who want to take action, a space for community groups and helping you and supporting the action that you're taking, linking you in with the right people. We want a space for town and parish councils, a space for schools and educational resources, and also for businesses as well. So the whole point of this, that it's going to be focused on the users of the website. And so it's all very well us saying this is what we think you need, but what we really want to know is what you think and you know that you need from us. So we'll be sending round at the end of this session, or perhaps tomorrow, so it's some information in a form that you can fill out, and you can tell us what you would need from this resource, and we'd really appreciate it if you could take the time to do that, to have your say and share that with us. So that's it from me. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Hazel. Yeah, over to Glenn. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's me just to round off this session by saying thank you to those great talks. They were really interesting and some really good questions as well. The whole team want to do more of these, although I would like us to do some face-to-face ones as well, but we will be doing more of these. It is really crucial to get your feedback. So there are some forms so that we know whether we're doing this right or whether we could improve these. And please sign up to our mailing list, because that way we can keep in touch with you and you can keep in touch with us. Learn more about our work and contact the team. Those email addresses again are, I'm sure you'll get them, but they are northumberland.gov.uk/climate change. And also, if you contact the team, you can get them on climate@northumberland.gov.uk. I'm really so grateful to everybody who's played a part in this tonight. And I'm very grateful to our team for pushing forward this work on climate change, which is a priority of the council, and I know priority for everyone that's here tonight, and will be for all of us. So that's why this work is so important. And all I can say is thank you very much for joining tonight. Thank you to the team, and I look forward to the next one. So thank you.